Record. Here we go. Um, so we are working with pretty much the same project team. Obviously, the town of Canton has taken the lead as fiscal agent. Thank you so much, Canton, and thank you very much to Dedham for being the past fiscal agent. Um, so again, the project team includes the Neponset River Watershed Association, Weston and Sampson Engineers, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, and the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, all supporting all of you to work together and advance climate resilience across the watershed. So for phase three, we want to advance what we've done in phase two and phase one. So we plan to enhance the watershed-wide model and incorporate some heat data, which Weston and Sampson will get into in a little bit. We'll be creating concept designs for some key areas. We will be working with the Climate Collaborative on technical assistance around policy updates, which have been identified in the Resilient Neponset work plan. We are going to be engaging with our communities again as well, but we're trying to again advance that and really deepen those relationships by assembling a community action team from residents of all our towns and identifying some community liaisons who can take the lead on some projects. And then we'll be doing community engagement out in the field. So we'll be at your farmers markets and in the classrooms and collaborating with some community-based organizations, again, which we'll get into in a little bit. So now I'm going to turn it over to Andy to talk more about what we've done so far on the modeling.
Thanks, Carrie. I'm going to try to boil down 2 years of hard work into 5 minutes. Ready, go. I'm going to try to touch on some of the key things that we did with the model over the last 2 years, and some of the outcomes that come from that work, information that's now at your disposal, and tools that are at your disposal. Real quick refresher, some folks might remember this slide. The watershed model was initially developed back during phase one in 2022 and 23. It was significantly updated in the last grant round, 23 to 24. Some of the key updates include significantly expanding the 2D mesh, so we had better flood coverage throughout the watershed, and adding some more detail specifically around culverts and dams and their operations. But the model covers the entire watershed, nearly 120 square miles, with a lot of infrastructure throughout. Next slide. In the last grant round, because we made so many updates, we recalibrated the model to make sure that it was continuing to produce, to simulate flooding in a reliable and accurate way. We used USGS stream flow data to help us calibrate the model. We looked at both peak flow rates and total runoff volumes. This graph does a nice job of showing the match between what the model's producing and what was actually observed at the USGS gauge during that March 2010 event that so many communities felt significant impacts from. And great results during calibration. All 4 USGS gauge locations were well matched. Next slide. So with this updated, recalibrated model, we ran a number of design storms through it. Folks may remember this graphic as well. Don't need to spend too much time on it. I think we're all on the same page. Rainfall events are getting more extreme, and extreme rainfall events are getting more common. For example, the 25-year storm of today will be something akin to a 10-year storm by 2050. So on the next slide, you'll see that we ran a bunch of these design storms through the model, and the model tells us different ways in which flooding will become worse, and not only the magnitude of it, but where in the watershed as well. Here's one way we looked at it. The total inundated area is expected to increase by over 1,000 acres during a 10-year event between a baseline or present-day climate and 2070. On the next slide, We look at it in a slightly different way. This is speaking of total runoff volume. So the amount of water coming off the land is also expected to increase naturally, even more significantly, more than 2,000 more million gallons of runoff between that same present day and 2070 10-year event. Next slide. So the model tells us sort of on a watershed scale where how much worse flooding is going to be, but it also tells us in specific neighborhoods, specific locations, which is the power of a 2D model like this. One of the ways we looked at that in the last grant round was identifying all the critical facilities in the watershed and understanding how those are going to be impacted, which has important impacts to emergency preparedness and the like. Next slide. Building on that, okay, we know where flooding, we know how much worse flooding is going to get. What can we do about it? We use the output from the model to help us understand differences between different catchments, right? The watershed is not the same everywhere. So in the first year, 2024, we used the model output to identify and evaluate the most effective strategy for mitigating those flooding increases on a catchment by catchment basis. 100 catchments spread throughout the watershed. What's the most effective strategy in each one? This is what Jason referred to as the snowflake method, if folks remember that. And then last year we built on that. We said, okay, let's rank these catchments. Let's help communities understand where they can get the best bang for their buck. We know what the most effective strategies are in each catchment, but which catchments will respond the quickest or most favorably. And so last year we spent quite a bit of time understanding which catchments were the low-hanging fruit and what strategies would work best for them. On the next slide, you'll see, NEPR took that sort of screening information, met with individual communities, and identified a particular catchment to study further. These were the 6 catchments or the 6 priority areas that were identified through that process. Next slide. Here's one of those 6 catchments. This one's in Foxborough, and we work with NEPR and others to come up with a number of green infrastructure opportunities within that particular priority area. Here you see several dozen opportunities, and we incorporated those into the model to see what effect it might have. And on the next slide, we see the benefits of that suite of green infrastructure opportunities. Here you can see the total runoff volume. The first column is the baseline, no action. That's what's happening today during a 2-year event. In 2070, that same 2-year event would produce significantly more runoff. But if these proposed suite of green infrastructure opportunities was implemented, the total runoff in this particular catchment would be reduced not only back to present day, but even a little bit better. So this one was able to achieve full mitigation through implementation of these green infrastructure opportunities. Next slide. Not only did we look at this for a half dozen catchments, not only did we look at green infrastructure in these half dozen catchments, but we also zoomed into one catchment, a 7th one. We zoomed in and looked at short duration, high intensity storms, which are of interest to many communities, understandably, and also what mitigation could be achieved through both green and gray strategies. Next slide. Here you can see on the left is what this area of the watershed looks like in the full watershed model. On the right, we built a sub-model from the full-scale watershed model to add, so that we were able to add a whole lot more data, a whole lot more detail, and that means that the output coming out of it is more detailed and accurate as well. So you can see the significant improvement in the granularity of the model output. On the next slide, you'll see that we looked at a suite of green infrastructure opportunities, but we also looked at gray infrastructure improvements as well across this catchment. And we looked at the combination of the two. And you can see that, there's a 10.6 million gallon increase from present day 2-year to a 2070 2-year. We can mitigate some of that through green infrastructure opportunities alone. We can implement a bit more through gray infrastructure, and if we combine the two and implement them side by side, we can mitigate the climate change driven increase in flooding to an even greater extent as they work in partnership. Next slide. We also use the model to look at specific sort of street level interventions, working hand in hand with Dedham. These were a couple of drain upsizing projects that were conceptualized last year in this particular submodel. And here you can see 3 of them. And on the next slide, you can see the model output kind of helps us understand what the scale of the benefits of those individual projects are, and how those benefits are experienced in this area of Dedham. You can see on the right, the red areas are those areas that would have flooded, but if these projects are implemented, would no longer flood. And so you can see real sort of on a neighborhood scale, the benefits of individual projects using a submodel of the larger Neponset River flood model. One last slide to pull it all together. Because I've been moving so fast, here are 4 key takeaways, outcomes that are available to you as a result of the last 2 years of hard work. The first is improved understanding of flood risks under present and future climate scenarios in your communities. And you can use this information to communicate with other decision makers and with the public in your community. The second thing is this model and the findings of the model tell us how much flooding individual communities and individual catchments within those communities may need to manage on a local scale, as well as across the full watershed. And this is helpful in setting goals and integrating into capital planning. If you know how much runoff is going to increase, how much you're going to need to find a home for or mitigate in some way, right? That can be useful. And so, okay, we're going to do this within 10 years. We're going to do that within 20 years. And you can start to integrate that in your capital planning processes. The third thing is that through this work, we understand what strategies are most effective on a catchment scale. The watershed, all corners of the watershed are not created equal. There are different nuances in different corners of the watershed, and that means that different strategies or approaches would be more cost effective on a localized scale. And the fourth thing is this model can be, as we saw with the Dedham example, this model can be used to look at real world strategies, but also specific interventions. This model can be sort of different areas of the model can be extracted, and we can create submodels from these or town-wide models, building off of the larger Neponset River flood model, and start to look at town-specific strategies, as well as specific interventions, whether it's a storm, upsizing a particular storm drain or other interventions on a neighborhood or even more localized scale. So some really fantastic outcomes of a lot of hard work over the last 2 years. And that's it for me.
Thank you very much, Andy. So in parallel to all of this hard work to identify opportunities for flood mitigation, you have all been working to plan for resilience projects that can improve resilience across the watershed. So not unlike the stormwater partnership that you're all involved in, you've been talking about working together to achieve economies of scale and efficiencies as you work together. So you worked through your existing local priorities, identified shared goals for climate resilience, and laid out a work plan to help guide cooperative efforts. So the work plan is organized by type of intervention, and identifies potential partners in funding. So we've got infrastructure improvements, which explore opportunities to retrofit critical assets, roads, bridges, utilities, municipal buildings. We've got the natural resources, ecological restoration, and open space preservation category, which focuses on restoring environmental resources and systems such as wetlands and forests and rivers that might naturally provide some climate resilience for our communities. And the last category is policy and planning. So implementation actions that that might require an upgrade in regulations or strategies that strengthen climate and community resilience across the region. So for each of these strategic focus areas, the collaborative identified 9 priority implementation actions and laid out a roadmap, which identifies sort of next steps, as well as partners and potential funding for implementation of each of these. So we hope to work with the collaborative moving forward to implement some of these. We also had a robust community engagement program, keeping in mind that we wanted to center equity throughout the project. So we facilitated a community advisory group made up of residents and representatives of community-based organizations. We engaged in general public outreach and education at community events through elementary school classroom visits, and we collaborated with community-based organizations to reach their networks. And I know that was super quick, but we want to get to the meat of this meeting, which is what's on tap for phase 3.
So
So
Carrie,
I'm first going to turn it over to Jenny.
yeah, nice to see everybody. Hope everybody's doing well today and survived the rain earlier this week. So this year we are doing some auguring in, if you will. We are going to be diving into the flood mitigation work a bit more, and we're also going to be adding a component of heat. So with that, Carrie, next slide, please. So this year we're going to be doing 3 key tasks, and we're going to have 2 meetings with you guys, and Carrie will talk about that at the end. But for the flood work, we're going to be doing a watershed-wide screening of potential opportunities for enhancing existing flood storage capacity. So that's thinking about locations where there are dams, dikes, or low sort of areas that may have an impoundment, a pond, etc., that could be controlled to basically pre-drain prior to a storm and create flood volume storage during a storm event. We're also going to look across the watershed for potential dam removal opportunities or partial removal. And then the first task that I actually kind of skipped over, but we're going to do what's called a blue spot analysis. And that's going to be a way to understand low-lying areas for potential flood storage. And I'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. Oh, sure we can. Can we go back one? Sorry, Carrie. And then for next year, we're going to spend a little bit more time on actual nature-based solutions projects and develop those into more detailed concepts, working with you all. You know, the goal is to get you guys projects that you can construct, apply for funding from MVP for, etc. So we're really going to be auguring into work we've done in the past years, as well as new ideas that come up this year. Next slide. Yeah, the blue spots analysis is basically a way to expand our modeling work using GIS instead of a true H&H model and SWIM that we've been using. So we're going to identify, potential flooding locations basically using LiDAR, and then we're going to apply NOAA Atlas 14 precipitation data to understand present and future flooding areas. And what happens is this kind of can mesh with the modeling that we've done, and now we can dig into some of the smaller areas of the watershed that weren't able to be included in the model just because there were limitations on how much storm drain information we could include. So this is really going to help people understand, like, where can we store more or where should we store more? And we're actually going to be using these data to come up with high-ranking sites and basically identify green infrastructure and nature-based solutions, as well as sort of underground flood storage components, because we all know we have to combine that thought process. And next slide. And then with the heat island work, this is something that Mystic has been doing, and I think if you're tracking the greater region, you're familiar with that work, but we wanted to add this in for Neponset to have access to this as well. So basically, the whole watershed is going to have mapping that projects existing canopy, impervious surface, albedo, and basically identify hotspots. and then develop ambient air and heat index maps for the watershed in both present and future scenarios. We have a plan to put data sensors out. They'll go out at the end of fiscal year 26, but then they'll stay through fiscal year 27. So we'll be refining that mapping as we are getting data back from those sensors. That's going to be a whole collaborative process with communities as well as nonprofit stakeholders, individuals that want to participate. And at the end, there'll be updated hotspots that are identified throughout the watershed. And if you go to the next slide, Carrie, it just shows an example of what this sort of looks like. This is from an example from our work in Boston, but you see the high heat areas that are prone to urban heat islands. We're considering all sorts of factors in our analysis, right? Elevation, canopy, impervious, water bodies, ground vegetation. And we're really thinking about estimating the future under no action and action sort of scenarios. So this is all going to weave together into a nice set of tools that communities can use when they're thinking about planning infrastructure projects, park projects, facility projects. You know, it's not just green infrastructure, right? I mean, it's green infrastructure for sure, but it's a tool that everyone can really be using. And I think, you know, the takeaway is that at the end of this, you guys are going to have more tools and more data at your disposal, as well as more specific projects for each community that could be applicable for funding, and really an understanding again of how all of this weaves together. So not just stormwater and flooding, but heat. So with that, Carrie, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Jenny. And I will turn it over to Karen.
Great, thank you. So an overview, some exciting new opportunities to engage the public. And we're thinking really broad on this in the 14 towns and municipalities. We're looking to get some great representation across the watershed. Thinking, 2 to 4 people from each town to come together and work on the priorities that we're setting within this new grant. We're looking to connect with priority populations, and we encourage community organizations, businesses, neighborhood associations, faith-based organizations. We're thinking broadly here, and we'll bring together some shared learning and work through some community liaisons to hold some local events, talk about what is climate resilience, how do we build it in our communities, look at some examples. What are some of the communities doing to bring this to bear in their areas, and how can we learn from one another and really come up with some great strategies to move this work forward. You can see we've moved from advisory to action. We're really looking on implementation and how to support these communities as you go through some of your own emergency and extreme weather preparedness. Next slide. And these will be the components that we will emphasize and work towards, bringing in, of course, the school outreach program will continue in our 5th grades. And we also have opportunities sometimes to work with the older students in environmental science courses and interests. We'll be doing some mailings to continue to be vocal about climate impact and extreme weather and adaptation information that is relevant to the work that we're doing. We're going to be doing tabling events in each town. We're looking for, again, representatives from hopefully at least all of the watershed towns, but several participants from each town are welcome, and a series of meetings that will not be a huge commitment, but probably 2 for each year that will be a solid opportunity to come together to really talk broad base about the work that's being done and how we can network and find synergy between the communities. We will be updating the GIS maps and the data for online flood model applications, so people can really keep updated and know what's going on. And we'll also update the story maps, so it'll be accessible for communities and residents to have a better understanding of the work that we're doing across flood and heat impact. That, pass it on to Van.
Great, thank you, Karen. So I'll share a little bit about some of the technical assistant resources that we're aiming to develop to support you all and the collaborative for this upcoming years. So in tandem to what Jenny was sharing earlier about identifying more specific projects to implement the climate solutions on the ground, we will also be developing resources. We're hoping to make it a sort of creating a toolbox, as well as some training opportunities to support your communities and municipal staff to build some in-house capacity and knowledge around climate resilience planning, how to leverage the local regulatory resources that you have in-house to really integrate and create a more holistic approach to climate solution in your communities and across the region. Ultimately, all of this will relate back to advancing the priority actions that you all had helped us identify and put together in the work plan for the collaborative this last phase. And so just some example here in terms of the resources that we could touch on, and all of this is just example that based on kind of our conversations in the last couple of years, but also open up for feedback and any suggestions in terms of what would make sense for us all to kind of walk through together too. But some example here in terms of the resource that we could create in as a toolbox of resources or as part of the training in terms of thinking about planning and policy assessment, reviewing and assessing sort of how to support residents and businesses in floodplains or the flood-prone area identify as we have been mapping and model. Anything related to climate resilient floodplain overlay, local bylaws and regulation review and updates, zoning, and any thoughts and kind of ideas around green infrastructure development or in redevelopment projects. So just some ideas here that we'll definitely in upcoming months we'll have more discussion and get your input there. And then, as I sort of mentioned, so here's some topics, and as part of not this year, but we will start planning for it, and into next year, we'll develop a series of workshops. Right now, we're slated to have 3 specific technical assistant workshop, again, to support you in terms of digging into the local bylaws and regulatory resources that you have, regulations to kind of review and see where to add and if there are opportunities to update and incorporate climate resilience element into the language to support you with current and future developments. So with that, we had created a survey, didn't get to send it out in time, but maybe we could kind of walk through and show you the survey now, and we'll follow up afterward to share with you the survey link, and would really love to see your input on the survey. Carrie, I don't know. Okay, thanks. If you're able to bring them up. Okay, so really the idea is that, and Rodoshi dropped the link to the survey in the chat too. Quick shout out to who have already fill in the survey. We appreciate you. But if you have a chance, I think it should not take too long, but the idea is that we want to hear from you in terms of if there's any specific topic, any specific local bylaws, regulations that you would like to focus on or to have more walkthrough. The idea of these workshop is that we will be providing kind of overview information of like the importance of these bylaws, local regulations, things like that. But also we will have hands-on interactive worksheet to kind of help you understand what it means to review and to update the language. Where would that make sense? How to kind of those strategic points to really strengthen your local language with climate resilience planning and implementation solutions. If you don't mind to scroll down just a little bit so folks can kind of see some of the questions. Again, meant to be short, so hopefully it shouldn't take you too long. And then at the end of the survey, we really just want to take the opportunity, as you know, the EEA kind of office have been, as a state agency, have been kind of start to do more of an eco one-stop shop. So the idea is that you should be able to just submit a project idea, and then they will help you identify which of the eligible state grants. They have 7 different state grant programs, I believe, now combined into this like climate, environmental, eco one-stop. And so just want to flag that the upcoming deadline to submit an EOI, not required, but strongly encouraged, is on October 28th. And so just want to bring back up sort of the priority actions that we have identified in the collaborative work plan to see if there are any interests among municipalities in the collaboratives, and how we can support putting kind of discussing and or putting together an EOI and potentially an MVP action grant with some of the priorities that we had identified. So if you can also take a moment to provide this input, so that would help our team sort of figure out if there's a next step and how we can support you all in now pursuing grants to implement the priorities that you identify. I think that's all I have for my section.
All right, are you all seeing the slides again?
Yes.
Great. All right, so as we continue to go through this, please feel free to put questions in the chat, but we will have time for questions at the end. So where do we want you to be in the next year? What do we need you to do? Most of our partners have promised a cash match for the MVP grant, which is fantastic. Thank you very much. And NEPRA will be coordinating that. We also want to make sure that you are tracking your in-kind work on this. Anytime you are thinking about this project, attending meetings, reading my emails, please fill this out and round up to the nearest hour. I will be sending out, I would do it now, but I can't do both at once. So I will send out the link to that spreadsheet after this meeting. We're going to want you to come to 2 model steering committee meetings this year or this fiscal year. We're also going to want to meet with the municipalities involved in those 6 subcatchments that we looked at towards the end of last year that Andy was mentioning. And perhaps find out if you're interested in submitting an EOI for any of those. We're also going to have a couple of local community public meetings on concept designs. So we'll let you know when those are happening, and you might want to come and join us for those. So what does this look like for the next year? So we're going to want to do those recap meetings with those on those 6 subcatchments sooner rather than later. So you'll be hearing from NEPRA and Weston and Sampson on those. And then the model steering committee meetings we're thinking are probably going to be between January and February, and then around April. And just to take a look at the following year, we've got our policy technical assistance workshops that Van was just talking about, and those will be spread out over the second half of this project time period, and we'll have 2 other model steering committee meetings, and you can see those public meetings on the concepts will be sometime in the spring of 2027. So the work is fairly spread out, and again, if you have any questions, just let us know. Oh, and look at that, it's time for questions. Why don't I stop sharing so we can see each other? So that was a ton of information in a short period of time.